Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman and thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, an unserved warrant charges Carolyn Bryant Dunham in the 1955 kidnapping of Emmett Till. Now a group of Till's relatives are demanding to see that warrant served. Former Attorney General Eric Holder weighs in on that warrant and shares his thoughts on the state of democracy, voter suppression, and more. The Field Museum's new assistant curator gives us the last word on why he says more accurate representations of the African continent are needed.
Art can really be this active way of engaging both your mind but also your heart.
Your last chance to view a local exhibit exploring the intersection of violence and art. First off tonight, in the basement of a Mississippi courthouse in late June, members of the Minnesota-based Emmett Till Legacy Foundation discovered an unserved warrant. The 1955 warrant charged Carolyn Bryant Dunham in the kidnapping of Emmett Till, a black 14-year-old from Chicago. Till was abducted, tortured, and killed after being accused of whistling at Bryant Dunham at a family store in Mississippi. Bryant Dunham's husband and his brother were both tried and acquitted of Till's lynching. Now the foundation, which includes members of Till's family, is demanding that the warrant be served and to see Bryant Dunham charged. Joining us now is Deborah Watts, Emmett Till's cousin and co-founder of the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation. Deborah, thank you for joining us. First, if you would, just explain your relationship to Emmett Till. How are you family?
I am a cousin of Emmett's and Mamie Till Mobley. Our great-grandfathers, Emmett's great-grandfather and my great-grandfather were brothers. Joe Smith was my great-grandfather, and Emmett's great-grandfather was George Smith.
Okay,
So
and of course, we all know in the family, we're all family, no matter how far back you go.
Yeah.
Now, you found this warrant, correct?
Well, it was found by Kali Rashid, who was with us. It was about 5 people that were with us at the time. It was Melissa Ernest, who's one of our ambassadors with the foundation, my daughter, Terry Watts, who's our PR director, along with Keith Beauchamp, who is a film director and justice advocate, and myself. So, but Kali Rashid was the one that found it actually in the lower level basement area of the LaFleur County Courthouse in Greenwood, Mississippi.
And what was that search like? How did you all gain access to the records?
We gained access with the permission of the county clerk. Jaribu Hill, who's our family counsel and attorney, requested that access. And it was initially granted towards the end of March. And Melissa Ernest, along with Keith Beauchamp, went and did an early assessment. And then we, after putting our calendars together and matching up dates, we knew we had to go back. They did an assessment and it was determined that there was another area that needed to be searched, and that was the lower area of the basement area. And so we went with gloves, with hats, with masks on, ready to find the warrant. And within an hour and a half, Kali Rashid was able to locate a box, looking through it, found the original file that had been there since 1955.
So did you know what you were looking for specifically for this particular warrant, or were you just looking to see what was there, to see what you could find?
Well, we knew that criminal cases were in a red folder, and that's where we found it. And we knew that it would be possibly, we thought, we didn't know that it would be a part of, whether it's in the minute books of August 1955, or whether it would be all together. But what we were able to find is a file folder, red in color, with the minutes, along with the affidavit and the warrant inside, and then a copy of a piece of paper that had Mo's Wright's address on it. So everything was contained in that one folder. So we weren't really sure what we were going to find, but fortunately, the ancestors led us to that folder, led Kali Rashid to that folder and to that box, and it was all contained there.
And Deborah, what was that moment like for you and for your family to come across that the way you did?
I'll tell you, we were overwhelmed. We were excited. At the same time, we wanted to be quiet, so we had this quiet level of exhilaration and excitement and just overwhelmed with emotion, because it was something that we felt was one piece of evidence that, coupled with the evidence that was gathered in the 2004-2006 investigation, that could be used. And we just, some of us fell to our knees, some cried, we held our breath. It was a mixture of emotions, but we were all, I would say, we knew we were onto something. We just weren't quite sure what, and didn't at that time even know what we were going to do next. But we did have an opportunity to gather together, gather ourselves, and think through what we needed to do next. And we called on the expertise of our attorney, Jaribu Hill, who guided us to certified copies and then give that to the clerk. And that is now held in a safe in the courthouse in LaFleur County in Greenwood, Mississippi.
What do we know about why that warrant wasn't served in 1955?
Well, actually, noted on the back of the warrant, it actually says, and I even have it with me here, it identifies Mrs. Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant as being, by the prosecutor, the figures that should have been served the warrant. But then on the back of this warrant, it says, Mrs. Roy Bryant not found in my county. And that was signed by the Sheriff George Smith. So we know at that time that, and later we heard that because she had small children, they didn't want to bother her. But, being an accomplice in a kidnapping and also a murder later, that's no excuse to not serve a warrant. And we know that warrants aren't, unless they're rescinded, they don't expire. And we know that this is an open murder case, and there's no statute of limitations on murder. Now, so we...
Sorry. I just want to ask you a couple more things before we run out of time. Now, I know that you and the Legacy Foundation, you all are advocating that this warrant be executed and that she be at least arrested under the terms of this warrant. We know that the FBI spent years reinvestigating this particular case. They were not able to tell that she lied at the time and when she did or did not lie. What if nothing comes of this? What is your reaction then?
Well, this is everything. This is everything to us. It should be everything to our family. And of course, we've been disappointed over the years. This is an open murder case. And so we in the community, the law enforcement, along with the DA in Mississippi, they should be doing everything in their power to make sure that justice prevails. Justice delayed should not be justice denied. And I'll tell you, Brandis, we're not doing this with hate, vengeance, or malice in our heart. Mamie Till Mobley, Emmett's mother, didn't have that, and nor do we. We just want justice to prevail. Now, we want it to work as it should. We want, at the very least, this warrant to be executed. And they have to go through the appropriate and authorities and process to make sure that that happens. I know the headlines say arrest her and all of that, but what we're saying is, at the very least, execute the warrant. Okay. We also hope that the DA will impanel a grand jury, and then, yes, truly, we hope for a conviction. But we want justice to prevail, and so right now we have enough evidence for that.
Okay. And I think we know in the past there have been grand juries that failed to indict her before. This is obviously a new piece. We'll be keeping an eye on it. Deborah Watts, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Up next, a one-on-one with former Attorney General Eric Holder on whether he thinks that newly found warrant should lead to an arrest. That's in a conversation recorded earlier. former U.S. Attorney General under Barack Obama warns that American democracy is in peril. In a new book, Eric Holder argues that since the Supreme Court struck down parts of the Voting Rights Act in 2013, states have sought to suppress and restrict voting rights. Holder says what he calls this assault on democracy ultimately led to then-President Donald Trump's failed attempt to overturn the election on January 6th, and that it continues today. The book is called Our Unfinished March: The Violent Past and Imperiled Future of the Vote, a History, a Crisis, a Plan. And joining us now is former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. Mr. Holder, thank you for joining us. Let's start with this most recent mass shooting, which unfortunately hit very close to home in Highland Park. And it's yet another one, obviously. We've seen far too many of these. And when you see them happening again and again, what comes to your mind when thinking about potential solutions?
Well, first, you know, I'm angered by what you see. I feel for the people who are the victims, the family members, the survivors. But it's also an indictment of our political system. The American people are united around really some common sense things that would make those kinds of shootings far less likely to happen. Universal background checks, waiting periods, the banning of assault weapons. There's majority support for all of those things. And yet our political system does not have the capacity, it seems, to get out of the pockets of the gun lobby and do what the people want to do. So it means, I think, that those people who will not support the people when it comes to gun safety measures have to be replaced. And we do that by coming out, by voting, and by holding accountable those politicians who will side with the gun lobby as opposed to the citizens of this country.
Now, shifting to the January 6th hearings, members of the committee, they've been making the case that then-President Donald Trump attempted to orchestrate a coup to keep himself in power. You've noted a particular exchange between Trump and former acting Deputy AG Richard Donahue, revealed in the hearings as being particularly damning. Let's hear a little bit of Donahue's testimony on that.
Let's now put up the notes where you quote the president as you're speaking to that. He said, the president said, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. So, Mr. Donahue, that's a direct quote from President Trump, correct?
That's an exact quote from the president, yes.
Now, since then, we've heard even more explosive testimony from former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson. Based on what we've heard so far, Mr. Holder, have we seen enough evidence of criminal conduct that we could see the former president potentially criminally prosecuted?
Well, I certainly think we're getting really close to that point. I mean, that statement, you know, you just say it's corrupt and we'll take care of the rest. That call that he made to folks in Georgia, find me 11,780 votes. All this talk about it's difficult to find the necessary intent with regard to Trump's actions. That's belied by what you just played and by what I said with regard to that Georgia call. He was clearly had the intent to try to steal the election, to foment a coup. And I think that we are getting extremely close to the place where you're going to be able to say that an indictable case can be made against the former president. And if that's the case, he should be indicted. He has to be held accountable.
Of course, the Supreme Court, their term just ended a couple of weeks ago. They had a lot to get through, and only 1 in 4 Americans approve of the job the Supreme Court is doing. So I want to get your thoughts on, this slew of recent Supreme Court decisions. The Dobbs decision, which overturns the Roe decision, expanding gun rights, environmental regulation. A lot of this court's decisions, some critics are saying they are driven by more ideology than law. How can the court maintain its legitimacy if it's increasingly viewed as partisan?
Well, I'm not sure it's viewed as partisan as much as it is viewed, as you said, as ideological. What we are seeing in the court, certainly with regard to the decision that overruled the Roe decision, that was not a new finding. It wasn't some newfound law, some newfound facts. That was simply a change in court personnel. And that's not the way in which our system works. Courts make determinations, and then subsequent courts try to follow those decisions. It's called stare decisis, this notion of following precedent. And to the extent that that's possible, that's what you do. To overrule something that was almost 50 years old and upon which people had ordered their lives, upon which people have relied on the basis that the court stated in that opinion by Justice Alito, really delegitimizes the court and puts at risk the way in which it is viewed by the American people. And so I would hope that the justices will not use the power they have simply because they have it, but use that power in a way that's consistent with the best traditions of the court.
Let's talk about your book before we have to go. In broad terms, it is about the fight to win the right to vote and efforts underway to undermine that right. What made you want to write this book?
The state of our country and where we are with regard to our democracy. I say in the book, and I've said very publicly, I think our democracy is under attack. And so what I wanted to do was to examine previous times in our history when our democracy was under attack, how the American people responded then, talk about the current situation that we are confronting, and then put out some really specific ideas about ways in which we can make our democracy better, maybe in fact save our democracy.
So some of those ideas that you mentioned that you do share in the book, you have ideas on fixing the elections, for example, with automatic voter registration, same-day registration and online registration, enfranchising the formerly incarcerated, making it easier to vote, making Election Day a national holiday. And then you also have ideas on fixing our institutions, including eliminating the filibuster in the Senate, ban partisan gerrymandering, ending the Electoral College and deciding the presidential election by popular vote, and ending life tenure for Supreme Court justices by allowing each president to appoint 2 justices over the course of their term. And those justices would serve for a limited number of years instead of lifetime. What hope do you have that some of these measures will actually come to fruition?
Yeah, it's a long list of proposals, all of which I think are really good ones and would really foster the notion of a healthy democracy. And so people will say, well, you know, that's too much. We're not going to be able to accomplish all of that. And we can't have that kind of pessimism because that leads to inaction. I think we have to be optimistic because that is what leads to consistent and concerted action. If you look at the history part of the book, I'm sure that at some point Dr. King and the people who surrounded him thought, you know, we're not going to be able to, how are we going to actually pull down a system of American apartheid? How difficult is this going to be and how can we make that happen? And yet they persevered and they did it. And the proposals that I am making are not nearly as big as the structural changes that Dr. King and the civil rights movement brought about.
We're almost out of time, but I have to ask you about this discovery of this unserved warrant in the Emmett Till case that would have charged Carolyn Bryant Dunham with the kidnapping of Till. What do you make of that discovery and the call by some members of Till's family that she should be arrested?
Well, you know, warrants can go stale over time, and I have to look at, you know, what the warrant said, try to get a hold of the evidence that led to the warrant that made a judge make a determination that probable cause existed there, and also then take into account what the Justice Department, I think over the course of the last maybe 10 months or so, made a determination that there was not a basis to go forward. But I certainly think that's a piece of evidence that needs to be examined. But really importantly, the underlying documents that led to the judge's finding that there was a basis to have her arrested, that I'd like to put my hands on and see if there's anything new there that might lead to a reopening of the case.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. Former Attorney General Eric Holder, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Back with more Chicago Tonight Black Voices right after this. It is your last chance to see a local exhibit that's exploring America's race relations dating back to the 1800s. The exhibit, set to close this weekend, spotlights the country's racism in a visual history lesson showcasing the intersection of violence and art while also encouraging reflection. Arts correspondent Angel Ito shares a look at A Site of Struggle, American Art Against Anti-Black Violence, and a warning that some of the images are graphic.
Black art has always been a part of how history has been communicated.
A new exhibit at Northwestern University's Black Museum is reflecting on the country's history of race relations.
What the exhibition seeks to present are the different kinds of strategies that artists have used to engage this topic. So whether it's using direct depictions of violence, or using abstraction to avoid literal representations of violence. We want to showcase the range of approaches that artists have taken to this topic.
Comprised of more than 60 works across various mediums, the exhibit takes visitors through American history, starting in the 1890s and ending in 2013 at the start of the Black Lives Matter movement. Northwestern history professor Leslie Harris says art has always been critical to the anti-slavery movement.
The earliest anti-slavery activists, they hired artists to depict what everyone knows now, the famous cutaway of the ship, the Middle Passage ship. From a very early time in that struggle, just as one example, artists were engaged and actively involved in the politics of making it known that there was an injustice that was happening. That was at a time when you had much lower literacy rates also. So people had to rely sometimes on the visual to reach broad audiences because not everyone was reading the paper or picking up books.
From different interpretations of lynching to exploring the reality of living in the Jim Crow era, the exhibit features numerous works that, while graphic, engage in the politics of bringing racial injustices to the forefront of the conversation.
One of the oldest objects in the exhibition is actually an activist pamphlet from 1895 that was written by Ida B. Wells, the anti-lynching activist that was based here in Chicago. And she is widely considered to be one of the first activists to appropriate lynching photography for the purpose of protesting lynching and making a wider awareness about this as a practice that needed to be eradicated.
With 2/3 of featured artists being of color and 1/3 not, Dee says both viewpoints are imperative to telling a complete story.
So you can also see this history of solidarity, that there were white artists in the 20s and the 30s who lent their artwork to support activism by the NAACP, for example. So people can also kind of see this like genealogy of solidarity.
It's very appropriate for me to have this exhibition opening in time for Black History Month. Certainly we can celebrate, but we also have to recognize what so many people have gone through because of racism and what people continue to go through because of that. And so this exhibition really demonstrates that. But even more so, it demonstrates how artists have chosen to use their special tools and gifts to reach larger audiences on these issues and to have us all engaged with them. And we can take from their example how we should each in our own lives think about what tools do we have to understand these histories, positive and negative, and how do we talk to our families, to our communities about them.
For Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Angel Ito.
And the exhibit, A Site of Struggle, American Art Against Anti-Black Violence, closes this Sunday at Northwestern University's Block Museum in Evanston. Highlighting African innovation. That's the goal of the Field Museum's new Assistant Curator of African Anthropology. The museum's Africa exhibit is about 30 years old and in the process of getting a major update. Foreman Bandama, who was born and raised in Zimbabwe, is working to bring a more accurate and comprehensive representation of Africa to museum goers. He leaves us with the last word tonight.
Well, I'm African. I grew up in Africa. I think I have a duty, a moral duty, just like these collections that are here also have a moral duty to also speak the story of Africa, because the story of Africa, it hasn't been told, at least not enough. And it has been mistold many times. You switch on the television, you hear about other things. So I think time has come, and perhaps time is now, where we need to do what we can do. The Great Wall of China, I'm sure you have heard about it, and I can guarantee you that many people have heard about it, but very few people have heard about the Great Walls of Benin, which are longer than the Great Wall of China, written in the Guinness Book of World Records back in the 1970s. But why is it that nobody still talks about them or knows about them today? That shows you that the story of Africa, or Africa generally, has suffered for a long time. Some of the things that people come to visit and to see in several other countries, they do not compare to some of the magnificent pieces that are found in Africa. And if we do not find ways of highlighting that, both in Africa and as well as outside Africa, then we are doing injustice to that part of our world heritage, that part of the past that can speak, that can highlight, that can educate, that can inform. The African people that are found outside Africa, they also have a duty to speak on behalf of Africa, because there are people, there are museums, there are collections that will never get a chance to speak for themselves, to advertise themselves, until those that had the chance, like myself, to come to a big place like this. So it's very important for us to highlight what Africa was also able to do, because of the years and years of prejudice that Africa has suffered. Yet Africa does have a lot to offer, and some of it has to do, of course, we know there are power relations. The more people know about Africa, the more they would want to visit Africa, and the more they would want to also experience and to see other things. And where there's no way they can visit Africa without bringing any form of wealth and income into the continent.
And Bandama began his role at the Field Museum last August. And that's our show for this weekend. Join me next week at 7 on Chicago Tonight. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm whose attorneys embrace a culture of philanthropy and service by volunteering their time, expertise, and guidance to help others in the greater Chicago community.